Can AI replace the analyst? That is a big question, and everyone in the analytics space has been learning what AI can do. And this has sort of been the question, the elephant in the room, as it were, since the emergence of AI tools, specifically Chat GPT. We've also seen lots of examples of Tableau with Chat GPT and lots of interesting use cases. And I think it's fair to say that AI is definitely going to make an appearance in the product, even more than it already has in the current set of features. But in this conversation with Rahul Trehan, he actually shows me a world where I think analysts are going to be even more important. I'm a big believer that you should empower analysts rather than replace what they're doing, because fundamentally they understand the business. And in this demo, in this video, I think he shows a perfect use case that actually speaks to that solution. One more thing to mention, Rahul works for Salesforce. He'll introduce himself shortly. But when we had a chat, we were just talking to each other as two individuals. He was Rahul and I was Tableau Tim. It's as simple as that. As ever, let's get stuck in.
Hey everybody, this is Rahul Trehan here. I have been with Tableau for last 8 years. I have done a couple of roles. I've been with solution engineering. I've been a customer success myself, and now I'm managing a team of customer success here in ASEAN. I'm based in Singapore. I look forward to this conversation.
This is amazing. Thank you so much for sort of agreeing to talk to me. I think about 3-4 months ago, AI was not part of everyone's everyday conversation, and then suddenly, out of nowhere, it's just completely exploded. And it's been an interesting journey. I'd sort of love to take your perspective on that transition before we get into what we're going to talk about.
So are we looking at why is AI catching everybody's attention? And
yeah. Well, why in the last 4 months and not, because GPT and all these technologies have been around for some time, but why in the last 4 months is it really sort of just taken off?
And that's a good point, right? Because the AI models and machine learning models, they've existed, right? I mean, we've had some of these models around neural networks and other models around statistical models and predictive models around for a while. But I think it's the first time. To me, it's sort of like a tipping point, right? It's like, I mean, the way I think about it is, and I've talked to a few folks about this, it's like, a browser being launched back in the Firefox browser being launched, right? I mean, it's that tipping point that it makes it so relatable to our experiences. Now we're looking at a browser-like experience where, we sort of relate to the technology now, right? I mean, nobody related to neural networks. Nobody related to, a predictive Bayesian neural network. Right? I mean, that's just
exactly
too much of far away from where we are. But I think now with Chat GPT, I think we for the very first time can really relate to it.
Yeah, I think they've potentially brought an interface to the technology, right? They've really made it accessible to a lot more people, because I think the only sort of recollection of AI I have is in Gmail when you go and type the name and it guesses the email or it guesses the next word or sentence, whereas ChatGPT is going a whole bunch further. You're giving it a question and it's just coming back with a whole very colorful response as well. Sometimes that's what sort of the delight about it, isn't it?
Exactly. And you don't have to worry about what neural network is there, what predictive model is there. None of that. I mean, I'm a human. I have a question. Go search whatever information you need to search, run through whatever information you need to transform it, and it gives you something that we understand and we relate to, which is why I think it has really caught everybody's attention. I mean, that's
good.
Point, yeah.
It's fascinating. And so let's sort of talk about sort of what you're going to show in a minute. But how did you go from what you were doing day to day to sort of building what you built? Like, what excited you? What was the spark moment in your sort of journey?
So I was playing with ChatGPT, and of course, just like anybody else, I was looking at explain this to me, explain that to me, explain some code to me, and I was doing all those exploration with it, and then I was like, what happens if we really feed some cross-tab data into it? I was just curious. I was like, right now I'm feeding whatever the language I'm feeding to it, and it of course goes and searches and explains stuff to me, and it helps me to code and stuff like that, which was great. But then I was just curious to say, like, what happens if I just feed it a crosstab and I say, like, hey, look at this crosstab and tell me, what do you see? Summarize this for me, right? I mean, instead of summarizing paragraphs, summarize this crosstab and tell me what are your insights. And that was the curiosity that I had around sort of the the TabGPT extension, advisor extension that I built. I mean, the early thought process was like, I was just curious to see like what happens when you feed it data
Yeah.
instead of words. You feed it
Yeah.
some data and how it reacts.
How it comes back. Yeah. And so, yeah, like, I guess, so you had that idea. What's the next step? Like, how does someone go from, I think we've all been messing around with ChatGPT. How do you go from that to, heads down coding something and putting it out there?
Yeah, so initially what I was doing is I took the underlying data from the Wiz and
Yeah.
I made those prompts and I was tweaking with it, right? Manually, of course. There
Yeah.
was no
Yeah.
coding, there was no extension, there was no Tableau APIs involved. I was just manually
Yeah.
taking some scenarios. I would take the underlying data for a Wiz. I would
Yeah.
see what kind of prompts I can provide. I would say like, hey, here is a cross tab. I'm be a data analyst, so I'll provide it like what I wanted it to do, and then I would say
Yeah.
like summarize it for me or find some insights, tell me why the sales is low, and I was just seeing like how it behaves for that cross tab
Yeah.
and what prompts are working well and sort of what temperature
Yeah.
settings, right? I mean, we talked about it. We're giving it more colorful insights versus more boring but predictive insights. So I got a
Yeah.
hang of it from that manual playing around. Then I was like, okay, can I automate what I'm doing today manually, which is
Right.
take the data from a Wiz, I copy it, I click right click, I say, look at the underlying data, then I
Hmm.
copy it, and then I paste it, I formulate that prompt, and I
Yeah.
press enter button. And my next question
Right.
was, could we actually just automate the whole thing so that a user doesn't have to do all these steps manually? Which is where I
Yeah.
started.
So you kind of,
Yeah.
you kind of broke it down into the constituent steps and you almost let's say bootstrapped it, right?
Yeah.
You just manually tried to see if the workflow works, right?
Yeah.
And and
And
and
then,
you
okay,
got there.
what is each step in the workflow? And then what does it
Yeah.
take from an automation standpoint and the APIs that exist in Tableau to
Yeah.
basically then code it all the way?
Yeah. Yeah. And the one thing I want to pick up on is you keep saying you're taking the crosstab data. And that's important, isn't it? Because ChatGPT can't do visual analytics like we do with pre-attentive
It
attributes.
doesn't. Yeah.
It has to actually look at the text and the numbers, right?
Correct. Correct. So what it does is
Yeah.
that it looks at crosstab and the words each token at a time, right? So each number
Yeah.
becomes a token, and then it basically looks at all those numbers individually, and it
Yeah.
also looks them as a holistic and
Right.
gives them some importance, and then runs through whatever your prompt is. Then
Yeah.
say like, what does it model mean for it, basically? Yeah. So it
Yeah.
doesn't really look at numbers. It just looks them as tokens.
Yeah, exactly. And then it does real data analysis, right? It's kind of it's the raw thing that Tableau exists for. Actually, it's going back to the basics and processing the numbers and trying to sort of pull out pertinent things that we should be looking at. So at this point, is it useful to have a look at and maybe do a screen share and you can kind of walk us through sort of how it works, just in case someone hasn't seen it, and then we
Yeah.
can get more into it. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So let's say you just have got a simple dashboard. I've got a
Hmm.
line series here for Superstore. I'm looking at monthly sales by different years. Now, what I wanted to do is I wanted to sort of, bring in the extension to talk about or interact with this Wiz along with ChatGPT. So
Yeah.
once you download the extension from the AWS link that I've hosted it on, it
Yeah.
basically becomes your local extension, right? So you go on
Right.
your left hand side, uh, and this extension is on your laptop.
Hmm.
Downloads the code onto your laptop and it starts basically running it from your sort of extension window itself, right? So it's a
Yeah. I
HTML
see.
code
Yeah.
and JavaScript code that runs inside
Of
this
that
particular
little
window once
container.
it's
Yeah.
downloaded, right? So
Yeah.
as you would see, it pre-populates some of the things, right? So it pre-populates the API, which is the
Hmm.
OpenAI API that we're using.
Yeah.
What it also means is that in future, imagine if you don't want to use the public OpenAI API and
You
you
can
maybe
train a
have your own
private one.
commercial private
Yeah.
one, right? You could
Yeah. Yeah.
easily update the URL to point it to your private, sort of API, large LLM, large language model API,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
then basically provide. In this case, of course, since we're using OpenAI, it's pre-populated with GPT 3.5.
Yeah.
But when GPT 4 comes in, I could just auto
You
update
could
this.
just use that. Yeah.
You can just use that model, and
Yeah.
you put in your own key, right? So
Hmm.
once you use that key, basically, you're good to go. And you would
Yeah.
see there's a temperature setting, which is quite interesting. And I've had some
Yeah.
interesting
Talk about that.
conversations with Andy about this as well, and about Gabe.
Yeah.
It's basically saying like, how much predictable you want the model to be versus how much
Hmm.
trade-off, right? So
Yeah.
what it does is that if you make it very predictable, the numbers become consistent, but the insights are really not that rich anymore, right?
The
It,
constrained.
it
Yeah.
stops it stops adding and multiplying things, and it just gives you a summary of whatever the cross tab is. Whereas if you make it creative, like 100, well, the insights become really rich, but then the
Yeah.
numbers are not adding up sometimes. And we'll talk about, how the space is evolving, and I've just shared it with the latest space posts around the next phase of the agents, and how that would improve in terms of number accuracy. But
Yeah.
going back to it, you save the config. Once you're done with it, basically, you're good to go. You've configured it. You select your sheet in the
The
dashboard
sheet.
that you
Yeah.
want to analyze. And in this case, what I did is I said, hey, take the values of, you type whatever you want to type, right? So this was a popular question that was coming through to
Yeah.
say, like, people wanted to understand how to make ChatGPT not only, uh, you know, explain the forecast model in Python, but actually run it. So what I did is, you paste whatever you want to post. So I say, hey, take the values of the sales from this previous years from this
Right.
sheet, run a forecast model, and give me the output of predicted forecast sales values for 2023, which we don't have here. And now
Yeah.
you'll see that, once you press that enter button, it sends the data from the cross tab along with the prompt that you provided, right? So that
Right.
this is your prompt.
Yeah.
And then it
Okay.
says, so what we're doing is we're saying, hey, ChatGPT, be a data analyst. I'm going to provide you a prompt, right? Take the prompt into consideration, and then I'm going to provide you the behind the scenes, the extension then gives ChatGPT the cross tab, which is, basically if you look at the underlying data,
Yeah.
it is
Yeah.
this
It's
data,
this stuff. Okay.
this
Yeah.
stuff, right? So we
Yeah.
basically
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
take this cross tab along with all the prompt that you provided, and one more system prompt. They call it a system prompt, which
Yeah. I
tells
know about these. Yeah. Yeah.
which tells it basically what role is it playing, and the
Yeah.
role we're asking it to play is to be a data analyst.
Yeah, yeah. So let's pause on that point because I think not too many people are familiar with the concept of the system prompt. The system prompt is like a way of basically giving it a character, right? Giving it a sort of behavior that
Yeah,
is reflective of the kind of outputs you want. So in this case, it's a data analyst, but an alternative could be I'm a decision maker in a business, or there's lots of little roles, and it can
correct.
kind of play into that. Yeah.
Correct. System, yeah. So as you just described it perfectly, right? System prompt is saying, like, what role do you want ChatGPT to play, right? It can take a
Yeah,
role of a translator, it could be a data analyst, it could be a travel specialist, it could be a travel
yeah,
agent, right? Doesn't matter.
exactly. It's you're giving it a character, and I think that is super interesting because we've touched on two things. You mentioned earlier that this is using ChatGPT. The configuration allows you to put another one. I think
Yeah,
just last week, Databricks announced something called Dolly, right?
yeah,
Which is like another large language model you can train internally. But I fully see a future where companies might train their own LLMs internally in house, and they'll hire people to do that, to do very specific things. That could become a competitive advantage amongst businesses. But also, now I just want to interject in here before we go on to the next one because it gets exciting. One thing I've just sort of completely forgotten about technologies like ChatGPT is exactly like the naming of what they are, the way they're classified. They're classified as large language models. They are essentially statistical models built around language, specifically language. What they're not is mathematical models. They're not compute models. All of these different capabilities do not sit squarely in the place of language models. And so what I'm trying to say here is that I think maybe this is obvious to other people, but for me, when you try and do maths inside of ChatGPT, you shouldn't expect it to get it right because fundamentally it's not about maths, it's about language, and language is about speech. So if you ask what is 1 plus 1, more commonly you should find the phrase equals 2. But in some cases, and if you happen to train the model on a data set that was completely made up of jargon, you will find instances in language where people have got the answer wrong, and therefore it's also possible that 1 plus 1 does not equal 2, and all the other variants that come about. Anyway, that's just a small thing I wanted to add in here before we get on to this next point because I think it's super important for setting the context. Let's get back into it. ChatGPT is a very generalized language model, right? You
yeah,
could actually purposely train a language model to do data analysis in very data analytical things, right?
Correct, and which is where I think my latest post just went today, because I was playing with
Yeah,
it, and I saw Andy also responded me back to me saying like, yeah, this is, it made him really happy, because one of the challenge with this extension was that, I mean, and he did the right thing, with the temperature setting being 80 or whatever, you would
yeah,
find that the numbers do not add up sometimes. There's a lot of
yeah,
inconsistency there.
yeah,
So
yeah,
what I was looking into it, what kind of specialized agents are being built, right? So
yeah,
I uncovered this thing called AutoGPT, which is
yeah,
becoming a hype now. But
yeah.
what I realized, I discovered, is that you can actually have agents which are specialized with toolkits, right?
Right,
And if you look at the latest demo that I posted, it's basically I used a SQL agent that uses ChatGPT Turbo 3.5 model. But what it
right.
does is that, we can maybe double click into it. But then
Yeah, yeah.
what it does is that it 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 gets rid of the problem, because now you have a specialized application on top of ChatGPT model.
But yeah, should we have a look at some of the more recent stuff you've done
Absolutely,
with AutoGPT then? And I think that people will be super excited about that, because it's
absolutely.
also interesting how quickly you've evolved what you started with, right? And you've sort of taken feedback. Andy's. I was going to talk about Andy Cockru's video, showcasing the fact that it couldn't do some to basic math. So this is almost a perfect response to that in a way, because there's a problem, and you're basically showcasing how quickly the technology is adapting to solve these emerging problems, right?
I just got a ping from Andy on LinkedIn, and he's happy now. Looking at what the latest demo is, I think he's happy because the numbers are adding up. It's hardcore SQL. It's hardcore sequels in action, and I have to say, like, I think Andy gave me that push to say, like,
Yeah,
why are the numbers not adding up? So that really triggered
yeah,
me to see, like, what is this forefront thing? What is this
yeah,
auto GPT agent thing? What is this
yeah,
LangChain thing? So I started exploring from that conversation with based on what Andy provoked, and then
yeah.
so
Yeah,
I think,
that's what this is about, right? Because I loved his video as well. I'll put a link to the video for everyone watching. But yeah,
yeah,
I that really really confused me that it couldn't do something so basic, and yet here it was doing all this stuff in Python. I've seen websites, I've seen codes, I've seen apps. How is it doing all of that, and yet it can't add up basic numbers, right?
yeah, and he's right. And he's right. When you look at the 0.8 setting or 80 setting, it doesn't add up numbers. Where it's failing adding up numbers quite consistently, unless you
Yeah,
drop that setting to zero, and then it stops adding the numbers. So it's like,
right.
then it doesn't do
Yeah,
that adding and multiplication anymore, and it just gives you more general
just more
summary of the
general
data.
stuff. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah, now let me talk about the latest one. And I think this will excite
Yeah.
people into, like, just how quickly the space is evolving, and I think more around not just now looking at, I think, analytics output, but also the workflow angle of it. Let me share my
Yeah,
screen
yeah,
and
yeah,
do some setting the scene for what this version is all about, right?
yeah,
I mean, it's Auto GPT, call it AI agents. It's basically specialized sort of agents that can work with the LLM, sort
yeah,
of to do things, right? So we are just talking about this, right? Today, the
yeah.
workflow is that you've got a data lake. Every time a user asks a set of business questions and scenarios,
Hmm.
a lot of heavy lifting needs to happen in the analytics layer, right? Your metadata layer.
Yeah.
You got to model the
Hmm.
data. You got to add all those metadata. You got to do that prep, and a lot of heavy lifting is required there, right? But now, I mean, and I'm going to show you guys the demo as well, is that, if I can attach a SQL agent to work
Hmm.
with let's say, in this case, ChatGPT, the
Hmm.
user's questions are translated into SQL queries, which the SQL agent can then fire against the data lake, and then
Right.
give the users the answers back, and effectively doing all that modeling and SQL joins on the fly every single time based on
Yeah.
the questions that have been fired.
Yeah.
Now, what are these AI agents capable of? So they have toolkits, right? So if I talk about the SQL agent that I'm going to show you later, it's a LangChain SQL agent, and it has
Yeah.
certain toolkits that is available to it, and those
Hmm.
toolkits basically allows it to list the tables in your data lake.
Yeah.
It allows us to scan the schema of the relevant tables based on the question that was fired,
Yeah.
and then it allows it to generate the SQL, which it uses the Chat GPT to get the SQL back.
Yeah.
It asks the Chat GPT to give it the SQL back, but then the agent can then fire the query against the data lake, and then give the observations back to the user, basically.
Right. Right.
Right. So these are
That's
sort of
super.
toolkits that are available to the agent.
That's quite a powerful list of tools. I like it. It on their own, it's kind of like very basic things, but actually together they amplify each other in a huge way, right?
Correct,
Yeah,
absolutely. And then in the scenario that I was playing around with, and I'll show you guys the coding element of it, and it's not very polished. It doesn't have a UI, but just to show the whole workflow end to end and how it's
yeah,
working. In this case, we have a music album sales database schema, right? It's
hmm
running on my laptop, just using a SQLite database. So
yeah,
something very lightweight, but the concept remains the same. You've got music album sales, you've got the track tables, you've got the artist table, you've got playlists and invoices for those sales of those albums and which customers are buying it, what is the invoice line items, and very typical, I would say, multi table data lake in which you have primary and foreign key relationships between different tables, right?
yeah,
Very typical, right? This could translate to any of the other database schemas that exist in an enterprise, whether it's sales, whether it's HR or supply chain or whatever, right? Now the scenario here is you want the user is asking a question saying like, hey, list the total sales per country, right?
yeah,
And it's also saying, hey, which are the top 5 artists by sales? So it's a multi-part question, right? It has
yeah.
two parts to the
Two
question.
parts. Yeah.
In a traditional world, Tim, how would you answer this question?
Okay. So if I think of Tableau, like
Yeah,
go get the country field, drop sales in, I normally sort it in descending order. And then in another sheet, I go, yeah, top 5 artists by sales. Yeah, artists, sales, sort descending order, keep to the top 5 using a set or something like that. It's quite
but
simple.
how would you figure out which tables to join?
Oh, good question. Interesting. Yeah. So honestly speaking, I'd have to spend some time looking at this model to try and figure out what's the lightest touch way that I could answer the question, and what are the minimum viable sort of things I need. Because the thing that always catches me out with models is the granularity of what you're working with and anticipating what you're going to need to do in the future. So for that one, it was artists, it was country, artist, and track, right?
Right.
So at the very basic, we have to go down to the country artist level and the track level. That's sort of to me the lowest level of granularity, and everything aggregates from up there. And so that's I've got tracks there. How do you get from artist? You have to go through albums, and
Invoices.
yeah, you start to weave your way through this model, and then you bring everything in.
Oh, no, you did a good job. I think that it's a complicated schema. There's a lot of
Yeah,
foreign key relationships, and
yeah,
you'll
yeah,
you'll
yeah,
do the
yeah,
you'll do the joining. You'll create that model, and then start dragging
yeah,
and dropping. Pretty much
yeah,
it. But then, as you said, a lot of time is spent by an analyst, just like what you did right now, to
yeah.
understand the schema and how to join it, and before you answer the question. Tim, are you ready to be blown away by
I am.
SQL agents? Okay. So I'm going to show you a
Hit me.
little intimidating coding world. But
That's fine. I'm not intimidated by this, but this is
what
good.
I want to show you is what I did here, and let me just walk through a little bit of what this is doing. So
Right.
we've
Yep.
imported a SQL agent in this
Yeah.
case, and it
Mm-hmm.
has a SQL toolkit. So what I'm creating here is I'm saying here is a SQL agent, and we'll provide it a toolkit, which basically had all those things we talked about, right? Ability to
Yeah.
scan tables, look at schemas, look at columns. And you see that we provide OpenAI API to this agent as well, right? So the
Right.
agent has the SQL toolkit and it
Mm-hmm.
has the ability to talk to OpenAI, ChatGPT
Mm-hmm.
model. Now, here is the input, right? I mean, this could be a fancy UI in future, but for this
Yeah.
particular raw prototype, I'm just providing the input saying like, list the total sales, the same query, right? And what are the
Mm-hmm.
top 5 artists by sales? And all I got to do is go here and let's clear this so you guys can take a look. And I'll say I mean, just think of it as a button, and I'll say
Yeah.
run
Yeah. Yeah.
run the analyst agent on this particular data set.
Yeah.
And the agent activates, it starts taking your input, it starts talking to scanning the data lake, it starts talking to
Mm-hmm.
the chat GPT. And let's wait for it for like a couple of seconds. You guys will see real time it making
Yeah.
calls to
What it's doing. Yeah.
chat GPT and scanning the database and stuff. I'll give it another couple of seconds because it's going over the internet and doing
Yeah,
all
yeah,
these
yeah.
things.
I'm probably hogging your bandwidth with the recording.
No worries, no worries. But while we wait for it, yeah, here you go. Here it
Wowzers.
comes back, right? Now let's take a look what it did. So what it did is that first of all, it gave you the output, the top 5 artists that you're looking for sales. Top sales are Maiden, Metallica, Led Zeppelin, and
Yeah.
Lost
Gave you
from
the
this
answer, yeah.
database. But this is not where the interesting stuff is. Look at all the intermediate steps, the actions we talked about.
Yeah,
It took
yeah.
an action. It said list the table sequels. So it performed this listing of SQL tables
Mm-hmm.
on the database, the SQLite running on my laptop. The observation that it had is this data lake has all these
These
tables,
tables. Yeah.
right? That's the first step. What
Mm-hmm.
is the next thing it did? It took next action from the toolkit. It says, I should look at the schema of the relevant tables to see what columns I can use,
Right. That's
right?
crazy. I mean, that
Now,
sounds really scary.
it is scary, right? I mean, look at what is happening in real time, right? It basically then looked at the schema of the relevant tables, in this case, the invoice. You see,
Mm-hmm.
it identified invoice and invoice line as the relevant tables for the
Right.
first part of the question, which is, what is the total
Which
sales
country?
per
Yeah.
country, right?
Yeah.
And then what it did is generate, and this is where I think the magic happens. It now takes this list of tables and the column names and the schema information, and it gives it to the LLM model and says, can you generate the query based on the user's prompt?
Yeah. I can
And then
see
give me
that.
the query back.
Wow. That is nuts.
Right. So look at the query generated. It multiplied the unit price by quantity. That becomes your total
That is
sales.
nuts. Yeah.
It does the join between invoice and invoice line item, right? Based on the invoice ID. And then it sorts it by descending order of total sales. And here is the result.
It's, that
USA,
is
the total
crazy.
sales is 523, Canada,
Yeah.
so on and so on.
Yeah.
The story doesn't end here because remember the prompt that we
Yeah.
had
Yeah.
two
Yeah.
parts to the question, right? Which is
Yeah.
what are the top 5 artists? It continues the analysis. So it says, now I should use, look at this guy, right? So it
Yeah.
generates, for the next part of the question, it generates a much more complicated SQL model. So
Wow.
it now starts joining the artist table and the album table and starts doing all these inner joins based on the
Yeah.
artist ID and the track ID to
Yeah.
give
Yeah. Yeah.
you, and you'll see something. So it had a failure. So the query somehow didn't work, right? It has
Yeah.
another thing
Column
in the
name.
toolkit. It's called the SQL checker.
Okay.
So what it does is that for the next part of the question, right, it says it failed, and you would see that. Give me 1 minute. You would see that it. This was the
It's
second run.
their unit
It's
price.
give me 1 minute. It's the second run, so I was going through the first run in my screen.
Yeah.
See the query checker here.
Yeah.
The
Yeah. Yeah.
query
Yeah.
failed. It said it has some problem with the column names, but in
Yeah.
the SQL toolkit with the agent, there is a query checker or optimizer. So it looks at the failed query that it
Yeah.
generated, the model.
Mm-hmm.
It fixes it. It regenerates the query using Chat GPT, and then it fires that final query, which joins your album and artist and track ID,
Oh. Yeah.
and boom, it gives you the five
There you
artists:
go.
Iron Maiden, total sales; U2, total sales;
Wowzers.
Led Zeppelin, artist, fourth number, and lost total sales.
That is incredible. The incredible thing here is it corrected itself.
Exactly.
Not even that it got it right.
Yeah. I mean, it had a problem with the SQL that was generated the first time.
Yeah.
There
Yeah.
was the
Yeah.
ambiguity with the column names, the unit price. It had an
Yeah.
issue. It said, okay, Chat GPT, it goes back to LLM, says like, there's a
Yeah.
problem. Can you fix this query?
Yeah.
And it gets the revised query, fires it back.
To your point earlier on, that just speaks to yet another toolkit, which is like a data dictionary builder, which starts to understand, it creates a dictionary of all these things, right? Because it sees here it's got it wrong. That could go into a dictionary as an alternative name for something, and then next time it runs the model, that's not going to throw it off. So you could improve the quality of itself over time really quickly.
And the LinkedIn post, I had a little bit of fun thing to add. Just like
Yeah.
you're chaining the toolkits here. Of course,
Yeah.
I didn't do it here. I could chain a Spotify toolkit here or e-commerce toolkit, and
And
I
then
could
go
take
create the
the
playlist or something.
and then I
Oh.
could take the playlist and say like, hey, can you create the playlist in my Spotify account? Boom. It's not just a SQL query anymore. It's you're talking about a
It's
goal. You had a
yeah,
goal in mind. You wanted to
yeah.
have the top artists in your playlist based on a database or
It's
a data lake,
incredible. It's incredible. Like
right? So you can see that you can start chaining these agents together, right? And these agents doesn't have to be SQL agents. It could be, it could be browser agents. It could be search agents,
mhm.
Google search agents. It could be a Spotify agent. Doesn't matter. It could be an e-commerce agent.
Are you able to explain how it knows which agent to use when? That's
And
the thing I'm
that's
curious
the
about. Like
part in which you have to chain the agents in the
you
code
have to
itself.
in the kind of sense that you're telling it you're kind of orchestrating
Yeah,
the role, and actually maybe that speaks to this thing about
yeah,
um, putting the tool into a character, right?
correct.
Like an analyst does things typically in a certain order, and that's what
Yes,
you sort of specified. Yeah,
correct, correct.
yeah,
So I
super.
think for now that's the case, but Tim, I mean, looking at the way the space is evolving, I mean,
That
I
will
don't
become
think
another
order will
AI.
matter. All you gotta do is just say like, here are the agents at your disposal, and go figure out how to
Yeah,
orchestrate yourself. I mean, I think
yeah.
that paradigm will change as well.
Again, because it's doing this so quickly, it's not hard for it to essentially learn over time which order tends to answer the questions the best way, right? Like it's even the way these things work is that today they're as bad as they'll ever be, and tomorrow they're even better, right? So what we're seeing now, what you've
Yeah.
built here, is literally the worst this tool is ever going to be,
It's
and
the
that
worst
sounds
tool, right? I
crazy
mean,
to
look,
say.
yeah, look at this, the worst tool. I'm showing you some, strings. I'm showing you some SQL generated.
Yeah, yeah, but yeah. I have to be honest with you though. I think the responses here are in a JSON array. Is that correct? So it's
This is
basically giving you
all
an
gives it. Yeah.
interface that you could very easily put to a web developer, and
I
they'll
would, I
turn this
would,
into an
and
interface,
and
right?
I think over the next couple of weeks, you might see that I will probably build a
Yeah,
nice UI
yeah,
where this
exactly.
input screen is user generated, and
Yeah,
then what I would do is I would probably format this JSON to give the output in a human readable
yeah,
format.
yeah, exactly. And
But,
and and that
but that's the
is
easy
that is
part.
exactly.
But that's the easy part. I mean, that's the
And but
easiest
that
part out of the whole thing.
I'd say that's the hard part, actually. I'd challenge you on that. I'd
Why?
say that's the
Why?
hard part because when we go back to the beginning of the conversation, what I said to you is that language models have been around for a long, long time. What OpenAI did is they gave it an interface, right? And actually, what you're doing here is you've pieced these things together, and now you're about to give it the interface. The interface is the thing that opens it up to, anyone who wants to try your plugin. This, as you say, this is the easy part. That's the hard part, the
Okay.
interface, right? The
Okay.
interface is
I
actually the
would
thing that
I would take up the
opens the door,
challenge,
right?
and you'll be the early prototype tester then.
I know for you, that's the easy part, right? Because you've done the hard work of sort of doing the back end development
The
and getting it all there.
APIs and
Yeah,
that whole
exactly.
SQL toolkit and
But
those things were the hard part. It's like putting it into an HTML page
yeah,
that
yeah,
shouldn't take that
that's
long.
easy, right?
I was excited, so I wanted to share it with everybody. I'm going to
Oh
spend
no,
some time
yeah.
to polish it up.
Trust me, there are tons of people who watch the channel who will have seen what you've done there and completely understand what's going on. And for those who don't, all I'll say is, like, it's incredible. It's absolutely incredible what I just saw there. It really makes me think about not just data engineering modeling. I'm thinking about the whole workflow, start to end.
Yeah.
How do companies reorganize themselves for this kind of disruption, right? Because there has to come a point where you have to let go a little bit, right? You have to sort of trust the tool. You have to see it do something small and then enable it with more and more trust. So are you able to sort of speak to, like, how do you see that challenge sort of being solved? How does a business start to take on this kind of innovation and over time slowly try and incorporate it?
Tim, I think the way I think about it is just, again, the example of browser, right? When the browser was
Right.
launched, the intent was
Yeah.
good, right? And I look, a lot of good things have come out of the browser, right?
Yeah.
Today we have the sort of applications in the browser and the mobile phone that nobody
Yeah.
thought when Firefox was launched that we will
Yeah.
be able to do all those things, right?
Yeah.
But at the same time, let's not forget there has been challenges. There is stuff out
Yeah.
there on the internet
Exactly.
that's not good, that's not flavorful, And I think it's the same thing with these LLM models and SQL agents, and you
Right.
can build, I'm sure, not so tasteful agents as well. And I
Yeah.
guess the question would then become like, how do you govern this thing? How do you audit this thing, especially from an
Yeah.
enterprise? And I'll be frank, right? I mean, I've been doing the prototyping, but I don't think anything is production ready today, right? I mean, I
Yeah.
have
Yeah.
no doubt, right?
Fair.
None of
Yeah.
these extensions, none of these models, none of these technologies are ready today to go into production into any enterprise for any serious business, right?
Yeah.
It is just the inception point, right?
Yeah.
Without
Yeah.
thinking, I mean, firstly, the space is evolving, right? So it needs
Yeah.
to settle down to a level that it becomes mature enough.
Yeah.
And then the hard part of how do you make it enterprise ready? What is the
Yeah.
governance strategy? What is the audit strategy?
Yeah.
What is the strategy to verify the numbers, reconcile these numbers, right? I mean, all
Yeah.
these things are work to be done. I mean,
It's
in my mind, I
incredible.
think it's
Yeah.
going to take a while.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, that I think more than ever, this is going to force the pace of innovation, right? It's the companies that benefit from this will be the ones who have their ducks in a row. They really know how to do all of that, because you do come across some organizations who really haven't learned how to adopt innovation well,
Yeah,
right? They have innovation, they have innovative tools, they have innovative people, but they've not learned to adopt the innovation really, really well. And I
yeah,
think this kind of technology will really challenge those kinds of companies. Whereas companies who do have an adoption sort of strategy, it might take them time, but when they get there, they're really maximizing the value out of something like this, and they're kind of re-envisioning where the future goes. So yeah. Man, this is so good.
did it blow you
Yeah, it
away?
blew my mind. Yeah, it did.
Same for me,
it's
which is
the,
why I was like, okay, I know it's a console and it's code, but I was like, I
it's
gotta just
totally fine.
like,
I
I gotta
needed to
show
see
it.
that.
I'll put the HTML page, in a couple of
Yeah,
days.
absolutely. And when you've done the HTML page, I'll update the description of the video so people can go
Yeah,
and have a look and play and sort of really enjoy it, because that it's the one of the things where, man, you really have to use it to believe it, right? You have to
correct.
use it to
But I
believe
think
it.
the thing with, I mean, and I think this is where the thing is. I mean, if you look at the HTML page, you might not see what it's doing behind the scene. But when you
Correct.
start seeing what it did behind the scene, all those,
Yeah.
those JSON things, it was showing you the actions,
Yeah. Yeah.
which is where people who are in this analytic space and data engineering
Yeah.
space, they see
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
sort of,
Yeah.
the aha moment, like, oh
Yeah.
wow, it just
Even
did all
even
those
like,
things.
I don't know if you're planning to do this, but like in the HTML page, you can obviously just the interface it shows the people. But I think the super interesting is that SQL. Like if you could put that in a
Yeah,
in a formatted way that a human would write it and say like and just show those steps.
yeah.
That's the incredible thing. That
Okay.
that
No, I
that's
like
just
that.
like
I like that
wow.
idea, and I think that's
Yeah.
where the input, and then you should have the sequence of
Yeah.
steps and sequels that is
Yeah.
embedded,
Yeah. Yeah. And
and
put it
then
in
the
like
final
a
piece should be that
yeah.
output.
Yeah, exactly. And it's a weird one because people just want to see the answer, but you don't appreciate the answer if
But
you
answer
don't
is
see the steps
yeah,
in
but answer
between.
is
Yeah.
not where the magic was. The magic was
Yeah,
really the
yeah,
action that it was taking on its own.
yeah, exactly. So yeah, oh man, I can't wait to see that. That's going to be incredible.
You're going to be the early tester for this.
Oh, good. Send me the link. I'll be there myself. We'll do a demo. We'll do like a classic new feature demo or something like that. Good work. Okay. Listen, thank you so much. Thank you so much for your time this morning. I'm going to be keeping up, trying to keep up even with all the sort of improvements you're going to be making, but also just the space in general. I think one thing I haven't had time to do is just really sort of learn the concepts behind AI. And I think in our discussion, you highlighted the importance of being aware of sort of, I'm going to call them sort of cul-de-sacs within AI. They're like little things that once you understand them, you don't need to go back there again, but they're really important and fundamental for the way the whole sort of thing works. And if you can learn those at a basic level, then actually you can help explain it to other people really, really well. So
Yeah, no,
definitely something I'll do.
no, absolutely. And I'm looking forward to your findings, and you
Yeah.
sort of also finding some quirks and some prompts
Yeah.
that
Exactly.
might
Exactly.
and as a group, then we start looking at all these dimensions and seeing like
Yeah.
knowledge
It is
sharing.
a collective task, isn't it? It's kind of like, it's not unless you put it in front of people that you start to find all these weird edge cases that people go to just naturally, right?
It is so nascent that it has to be collective, right? I mean, it's
Yeah.
such at
Yeah.
early stages, then so many moving pieces at the same time that
Yeah.
it has to be collective. I think we'll all benefit from leveraging each other's finding and summaries, and
Yeah.
of course, and also where it's breaking, which is an important
Yeah.
piece of, as you just highlighted, right? I mean, all those pieces
Yeah.
breaking around governance and all those things, right? I think, and that's where, as collectively we move sort of, we take a step forward.
Yeah, amazing, amazing, good stuff. So we made it to the end of this video, and there's quite a lot that I had to cut out just to get this into a workable format for YouTube. But what this whole discussion, and in fact the last few weeks has showed me, is that I don't know anywhere near enough about AI as I ought to. So one of the things I'm going to be doing the next week or two is starting a new YouTube channel purely for the purpose of cataloging my journey learning AI. It's essentially going to be one video every single week, just learning what I'm learning about AI, sharing what I'm learning about AI, even if I can get my words correct. And the whole point of it is to just essentially do 52 videos over 52 weeks, just simply covering what I'm coming across, what I'm learning, the tools I'm using, not just applications in analytics, not just tools in analytics, but also interesting applications, creative applications. Like even when I'm making videos, for example, I've started using AI to help improve things like transcription, all of that kind of stuff. As I go down through this journey and I build my understanding, each week I'll be trying to package it in a way that's maybe useful to others. And I'm not trying to sort of, reach a large audience. If it's useful for you, great. But that's where I'm going to be putting all of this stuff. So if I reference it in videos going forward, that's the channel to go to and look out for that. Unfortunately, YouTube punishes you when you start to make content about different topics that it thinks you don't make topics about. And because this channel is about Tableau, as soon as I start making content about AI, and as soon as you guys start enjoying the more than my Tableau content, unfortunately, what YouTube will do is it will stop showing you the Tableau content. It's just something that happens on YouTube platforms. So this channel is Tableau Tim. It has to be about Tableau nearly always. And so that's what we're going to do. So separate channel for AI. Look out for that coming soon.